Kesubos Daf Nun Hey. We begin the last few lines on Daf Nun Dalid. The Gemara introduces a halacha and 14 nafkaminas to that halacha. Then the Gemara will bring four machlokes between the people of Pumbedisa and Masmachasya. And then the Gemara will get into the machlokes between Rav Elazar ben Azariah and the Tanakama. So first, the Gemara begins. We've seen a halacha. The Mishnah says that if somebody wants to add money to the ksuba, so he can. He's allowed to enlarge the ksuba award for his wife. So the Gemara points out it doesn't say that he's allowed to write whatever amount he wants to give her. That would imply, if it would have said that he's just writing a gift to his wife besides for the ksuba. He's saying, I'm going to give you the following money as well. That's just a gift. By saying that it's added to the ksuba, it implies that this additional money also becomes ksuba. It has the property of being ksuba. It's not just a gift. So the Gemara says there are 14 nafkaminas to whether that extra money that he's writing into the ksuba, whether that counts as a gift or whether it counts as ksuba. So the Gemara is going to go through these 14 things. So the Gemara says this, first of all, this halacha, the fact that it says to add to the ksuba instead of to just write in the ksuba, shows that any tanai ksuba is part of the ksuba. Has the same halachas as the ksuba itself. And the 14 nafkaminas are as follows. First of all, if she sells her ksuba, she generally sells to someone the right to collect her ksuba instead of her. That includes this extra money as well. If she's mochel ksuba, she tells her husband, I waive my right to collect the ksuba, then this extra money is waived as well. Now, if she loses her ksuba because she rebels against her husband, that is, she does something which she's not allowed to do, such as, for example, depriving her husband of his marital rights, then the halacha over there is that she loses her ksuba and she can be sent away. She doesn't collect her ksuba anymore. There, the halacha is that she loses this extra as well, because this is also counted as ksuba. Had it been a gift, she wouldn't lose it. Now, there's a halacha of pogemas ksuba. That's if she admits a part of the ksuba has already been repaid, then she has to swear on the rest of it. That includes, that same thing applies to this extra. Tovas is that if she demands the payment of any of this ksuba, then she loses her support. This is talking about after her husband had died and she's being supported from the estate. She loses that support as soon as she asks for the ksuba. That's even if she only asks for this extra, this tosefes that he added on. Now, if she violates any type of halachas or minhagim which make her lose the ksuba, she loses this extra as well. Next is if there was a certain property that was set aside to collect the ksuba, and after the death of the husband, that property went up in value, there the halacha is the extra, the increase, belongs to the estate, does not belong to her. She cannot say it's my thing that went up in value. Instead, she gets less. That applies to anything which was set aside for this extra money as well. Third thing is shavua. There are a number of situations in which a woman has to swear in order to get a ksuba. The Gemara has a Mishnah Daf Pei Zayin which explains them all, and that includes collecting this extra as well. Shvius halach is that Shemitah does not cancel ksuba. It cancels many obligations, many fiscal obligations, without a special court order. But it does not cancel ksuba, and that applies to this extra ksuba as well. The next halacha is somebody who writes over all his property to his children and leaves over a little bit for his wife. There, the halacha is that she forfeits her ksuba. She doesn't get her ksuba anymore. That includes this extra. Ksuba can only be collected from land. That includes this extra, and the land that it's collected from is ziburis, the lowest quality land. That applies to this as well. Now, she does not have a deadline to demand her ksuba as long as she's still living in her husband's house. Once she goes back to her father's house, she has 25 years. That applies to this extra as well. And the last halacha is ksubas benin dichrin, that the money that's set aside in the ksuba goes to her children as an inheritance. That applies to the extra money as well. Does not apply to anything that would have been considered to be a gift. The Gemara now introduces four machlokes in between the people of Pumbedisa and the people of Masmachasya. The first three are all in the topic of ksuba, and the other halachas like the people of Pumbedisa. The last one is not on the topic of ksuba, and there the halacha is like the people of Masmachasya. So machlokes number one is about ksubas benin and dichrin, the money that's given to the sons as a collection of their mother's ksuba if she died. The question is, do they have a right to collect that money from property that was sold by the father before he died? So on the one hand, the people of Pumbedisa say that the way this is written up in the Ksuba is that we call it an inheritance. Inheritance is not collected from land that's already been sold. The people of Mazam Mechasi said that it's called a Yasvun, it's called a gift, and therefore that is collected from land that has been sold. The halacha is like the people of Pumbedisa, you cannot collect from land that has been sold for Kesubos Binin Zichrin. Second machlokes is if a husband set aside property for his wife to collect her ksuba from. He said, this is, you're going to collect your ksuba from here. So then he dies and she comes to collect the ksuba. So the halacha is when a woman comes to collect her ksuba after her husband had died, we make her swear that she didn't get paid yet. And the reason is we're afraid that the husband already paid her or set aside a bundle of property for her to collect from when he dies, and we need to make sure that that didn't happen. There's no way that the inheritors would be aware if that had happened. So, if however he already set aside property for her to collect from, we don't have to assume that there's a second property somewhere because nobody sets it aside, and therefore you don't have to swear. That part everybody agrees to. The question is, what happens if he set aside property and then it got destroyed? Do we say, well, it got destroyed, so it could be that he set aside something else, and therefore she has to swear that she doesn't have anything else set aside before she can collect from the general estate? Or do we say, no, a person's not going to do it a second time. He sets aside once, and if it got destroyed, he's not going to set aside a second time. He's not going to do two, and therefore you could assume that he did not leave anything specific for her, and she can collect from the estate without a shua. That is a machlokes again. The Gemara discusses that the people of Pumbedisa say you do not have to swear. Mas Mechasi say you have to swear, and the halacha is that you don't have to swear like Pumbedisa. Okay, next machlokes is if there was land set aside for her to collect. So if he set it aside with 4 borders, he specifically denoted which piece of land, that's called set aside. We assume he didn't set aside anything else, and she doesn't have to swear that she doesn't have anything else set aside. If, however, he only mentions 1 border, now you have a machlokes Pumbedisa. People would say she doesn't have to swear because that is still called set aside, and the Masmachasi people that say no, she does have to swear 1 border is very not specific, and therefore we still don't know. Maybe there's something else set aside for her that she's already collecting, and therefore she should have to swear. And again, the halacha is like the Pumbedisa people. Fourth case is no longer talking about ksuba. Fourth machlokes is they're talking about somebody who says to witnesses, I would like to give over property to somebody else as a gift, write it down, sign it, and give it to him. Now, if he does a kinyan with them, that is, he's makted to them a kinyan chalipin, then they don't have to ask him again to make sure that he really means it before they sign it and they give it over. They actually deliver and change title. If, however, he didn't do a kinyan, then you have a machlokes if they need to check or not. Pumbedisa say they don't have to check. Masmachasi say they do have to check to make sure that he still wants. And the halacha is that they do have to check, like the Pumbedisa people. Gemara now moves on to the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Mishnah. Gemara will explain that it is also machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Nosson who the halacha is like. The Gemara will say what that machlokes is based on and try to figure out which Amora says like which Tana halachically. So as we've seen in the Mishnah, the Tanakama and Elazar ben Azariah argue when a woman and a man end their marriage from Erusin, they never achieved Nisuin, they just did Erusin, and then she's widowed or divorced. She collects her main ksuba, that's for sure. The question is, does she collect anything extra written in the ksuba? According to the Tanakama, yes, she does as part of the ksuba. According to Elazar ben Azariah, she does not. He only wrote it as part of the benefit of the marriage. He wanted to find favor in her eyes through the marriage. If the marriage never happened, he never intended for this gift, this extra added to the ksuba, to go into effect. So Gemara says machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Nosson who the halacha is like, and we don't know who's who. So Gemara would say the machlokes is probably based on the concept of umdana. Do we claim that we can understand and figure out and get to the bottom of what somebody was thinking when he said or did something which is a bit hard to understand? According to Elazar ben Azariah, we can figure out what he had in mind. He had in mind that this should solidify his marriage, and he only intended for it to go into effect if there was a marriage. Therefore, whichever of these Amoraim hold that we can figure out what a person had in mind, they would be the one who passed like Elazar ben Azariah. So the Gemara first is going to say that it's Rabbi Nosson. The Gemara later is going to show that Rav also holds that way, and the Gemara will settle. So the Gemara says we're going to show that Rabbi Nosson holds of umdana. He holds that we do figure out what a person's intent was. Where do you see that? It's in the case where Rabbi Nosson paskins halacha like Rav Shimon Shizuri, talking about a situation where somebody's very sick, he's at risk of dying, and he tells two witnesses, write a get for my wife. Now, what did he mean? He didn't say write it and give it to my wife. So it's one of two things. Either he meant to say write and give, and therefore the witnesses should write and give. He just forgot to say give because he was too sick. Or is it possible that he just wanted to write it because he wanted to scare his wife? Like some men will do, they'll write a get just to threaten her, and they never really intended for it to be given yet. So, what is the halacha going to be here? So, Rabbi Shimon Chazuri says we assume that he did not want to just scare her. He was probably just very ill, and therefore he missed saying give it. So there we are assuming we understand what he had in mind. Rabbi Nassan says halacha is like that. So you see, Rabbi Nassan is the one who holds of umdina, and therefore he should be the one who passes like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In the case of Shumas Ma'aser Shel Demai, we say the same thing. That's talking about where somebody had produce which he bought from an Amaret, so he didn't know if Meiser was taken or not. Al pi takanas Chazal, he has to take Meiser. That Meiser has to take Trumas Meiser from, which that goes to the Kohen, and it's also for Yisrael to eat, midrabanan. Then the Yisrael went and dropped it into the rest of the Meiser, and now it's all mixed in, he can't eat any of it. So you go back to the Amaret and you ask, did you really take Meiser, in which case the second Meiser was void, and the Trumas Meiser is void, or did you not? And if you do, you can rely on him. So again, we have this concept of understanding what the person meant when he said. So now that we're asking, we have a kasha because Rav also seems to hold to the concept of umdana. He also says that we can't understand what a person had in mind, and therefore you don't have a proof which one holds like Elazar ben Azariah, which one holds of umdana. So the Gemara brings its proof that Rav holds of umdana. That is in the case where somebody is a shchiv merah, he's about to die, and he tells witnesses to give over his property to a certain individual with a kinyan. So here you have a problem. Because Allah says if a shchiv merah, if a person who's very sick says give something over, that's a kinyan itself. That we're careful with the health of a shchiv merah, and his condition will worsen if he thinks that what he says is not going to be carried out. Therefore, if he says to do something, it's counted as if a kinyan happened. This person, though, said to do a kinyan. So that means he has two things going on. He has a shchiv merah, that's one kinyan, and there's the fact that he did a chalipin, another kinyan. So which kinyan did he mean to work? He wrote in the shtar that it should work with a kinyan, even went ahead and he did a kinyan. What did he have in mind? So this is a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So Rav says, and Gemara says that the Talmidim of Rav say in his name that he was just trying to make two kinyanim. He wanted them both to work and to overlap, even though it's redundant. Why? Because each one has certain scenarios in which it works. For example, a matan shchiv merah works even on money. You can transfer cash or loans with a manas shchiv merah. Chalipin doesn't work on money. So he wanted, therefore, that his property should be given over as a manas shchiv merah to be able to transfer a property as well. Now, he wanted to do chalipin because the shchiv merah is canceled if he gets better. In this case, he didn't want it to be cancelable. He wanted it to stick even if he got better, and that's why he made it a chalipin as well. So that's why he made these two things. They overlap, there's no problem. That's what we assess his intent. Shmuel says that's not, I don't know if he could assess his intent like that. I don't understand what he did, and therefore I assume this whole thing is null and void, because it very well may be that he thought that he's going to do a chalipin, which is a manas shchiv merah. Now, manas shchiv merah doesn't take effect until after he dies, and chalipin doesn't work after he dies. So if he wanted to do chalipin after he dies, he did nothing. So the whole thing is canceled and it's void. Now, there you clearly see that Rav also says that we assess what his intent was, and based on that we act. So the Gemara says, therefore, Rav and Rav Nassan both hold of this concept, and therefore that couldn't be the reason for their machlokes. The Gemara says the reason for their machlokes is different. The reason for their machlokes is what intent do we assess to the person who wrote extra money in the ksuba? According to one opinion, and again we don't know who, we assess that he wanted to please her as part of the marriage, but the other one he wanted to please her as part of the engagement. If it was part of the engagement, then it will be chal. She will be able to collect that even if they got divorced or he died from Arison.